Long before the fire or the miracle regrowth, there was a promise whispered between a dying wolf and a trembling boy beneath the falling snow. What followed would make the world question whether nature forgets or simply waits for someone willing to listen. If you feel stories like this still matter, hit like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from down below. Your voice keeps the memory alive. In the remote forests of northern Minnesota, 12-year-old Darius Turner, a quiet black boy spending the winter with his grandfather after his parents' tragic passing, trudged through snow that reached his knees each step, a battle against the cold that clawed at his skin. The air was bitter and thin, biting into his lungs, and his breath drifted away in clouds that vanished into the falling white. His companion, a black Labrador mix named Shadow, padded ahead, ears alert, his fur dusted with frost like the ash of an old fire. Darius had been sent out to gather firewood, but Shadow's sudden bark shattered the stillness of the morning. The sound echoed across the valley like an alarm, and Darius's pulse quickened. "What is it, boy?" he called out, his voice muffled by the scarf around his face. The dog sprinted ahead, digging frantically near a tangle of pine branches that had collapsed under the weight of the storm. Darius stumbled toward him, his boots sinking deep. Then he saw two small bundles of life, shivering violently, their fur heavy with ice. Wolf cubs, barely breathing. One let out a thin, pitiful cry, and Darius felt his chest tighten as if the sound had pierced through every layer of winter between them. He glanced around the trees, scanning for movement. No mother, no tracks leading away, only snow and silence. The storm must have separated them. For a moment, Darius hesitated. His grandfather's voice from the night before echoed in his mind. "Nature knows what it's doing, boy. Don't go meddling where you don't belong." But how could he walk away? He had seen too much loss already: his parents, his home, the warmth that used to live inside him. He couldn't stand by and watch something else fade into nothing. Kneeling in the snow, he slipped off his jacket, ignoring the sting of the cold that bit into his arms, and carefully wrapped the cubs inside. They were limp, fragile, and cold as stones. "Come on, little guys," he murmured. "Hang in there!" Shadow sniffed them gently, whining low in his throat, and then turned toward the cabin as if urging Darius to move. The trek back was brutal. Snow lashed at his face, and the weight of the cubs felt heavier with every step. Darius's fingers were numb when he reached the porch. He kicked the door open with his boot stumbling inside, and warmth from the crackling fire met him like a blessing. His grandfather, Elijah Turner, looked up from his chair near the hearth, his Bible resting open on his lap. "Lord have mercy, Darius. What did you drag in here?" the old man said, rising slowly. "They're freezing, Grandpa. If I don't warm them up, they'll die." Elijah frowned deeply. "You can't bring wolves into this house. They're wild creatures, dangerous." Darius set his jaw, lowering the bundle by the fire. "They're babies. They won't make it through the night if we don't help." Elijah sighed, rubbing his temples. He was a stern man, hardened by years of logging and loneliness, but his grandson's voice, steady pleading, cracked something in him. "You've got your mother's stubbornness," he muttered, shaking his head. "All right, boy, but keep that mud of yours between you and them." Shadow had already curled himself around the cubs, his body a living wall of warmth. His eyes flicked up to Elijah, calm but unwavering, as if to say he'd already decided this was his responsibility. Darius knelt beside them, feeding the fire, watching the ice melt from their fur. Hours passed in silence. The wind moaned outside, pressing against the cabin walls like some restless ghost, but inside, the air pulsed with life again. One cub sneezed, startling Darius, and the other twitched its tail. He grinned for the first time in months. "See, Grandpa? They're fighters." Elijah didn't answer. He just stared at the boy, at the way his shoulders seemed a little lighter now, as if saving something so small had also saved a part of himself. By nightfall, the storm had eased. Darius sat on the rug beside the fire, Shadow's head resting on his knee. The cubs were asleep, their tiny chests rising and falling. The boy's eyelids grew heavy, and before long sleep claimed him. He dreamed of his mother, her voice gentle and warm, singing that lullaby she used to hum on stormy nights. The tune drifted like smoke, blending with the soft howling of wolves in the distance. In the dream, she stood by a silver lake, her hand outstretched. "You've got a kind heart, baby," she whispered. "Keep it warm even when the world turns cold." Darius murmured her name in his sleep. Shadow's ears perked at the sound, and his gaze shifted to the window. Outside, beyond the glass, glazed with frost, two glowing eyes watched the mother wolf. She stood silent in the moonlight, her fur shimmering like liquid silver. She didn't growl or bare her teeth. She simply stared at the boy through the window as though seeing something she recognized. Then she turned and disappeared into the woods, leaving only paw prints in the fresh snow. Shadow whined softly, but didn't move. "The one your mama had before she went off chasing things she couldn't explain." Darius stayed quiet. He didn't want to tell Elijah that he'd seen eyes in the darkness last night, or that he'd dreamed of his mother standing beside a wolf that glowed like moonlight. He just kept staring at the forest beyond the window, the place where the snow swallowed everything it touched. Shadow lifted his head, ears pricking. The cub stirred, whining softly. "Easy boy," Darius said, crouching beside him. But Shadow didn't relax. His body stiffened, muscles coiled tight. Then came the sound, a long, haunting howl that rolled over the frozen valley, both beautiful and terrifying. Elijah froze mid-sip. "That's her," he said quietly. "The mother." The howl came again, closer this time. Shadow stood tail low, but steady gaze fixed on the tree line. Darius felt something pull inside his chest, a tug he couldn't ignore. He slipped on his coat. "Where do you think you're going?" Elijah asked sharply. "She's out there looking for them," Darius said. "If I can show her they're safe, you don't walk toward a wolf boy. You walk away from one. She's not here to hurt us," Darius said softly, his voice trembling but certain. "I saw her last night. She was watching, not hunting." Elijah studied him for a long moment, his wrinkled face unreadable. Then he sighed and reached for a small wooden box on the mantel. From it, he pulled a brass compass, its lid etched with swirling designs. "This belonged to your grandmother," he said. "It kept me alive more than once when I was lost in these woods. Maybe it'll do the same for you." Darius accepted it carefully, the metal cold against his palm. Inside the lid, faint letters spelled E.T. It was hers eye, and she swore that needle could find its way home even when North forgot itself. Elijah's tone softened. "If it starts spinning, you turn back. Promise me." Darius nodded. "I promise." He tucked the compass into his pocket, glanced at Shadow, and opened the door. A gust of cold rushed in, biting and pure. The world outside felt alive in a way that made his skin prickle. The forest waited patient and ancient. Darius stepped into the snow, the crunch of his boots swallowed by silence. Shadow moved beside him, black fur stark against the pale drifts. The air smelled of pine and smoke, but beneath it was something else, a scent wild and clean, like rain on stone. The compass trembled faintly in his pocket, as if sensing the path before he did. A few minutes into their walk, Shadow stopped, nose lifted, tail flicking. Ahead between the trees, a glimmer of movement, silver fur catching the morning light. The wolf stood there larger than any Darius had imagined, her amber eyes glowing with intelligence. She looked at him, not like prey, not like threat, but as if she already knew who he was. Darius's breath caught. "Hey there," he whispered. "They're safe, I promise." The wolf tilted her head, then turned and began walking away slow enough for him to follow. Darius hesitated only a moment before stepping after her. Shadow trotted at his side, occasionally glancing back toward the cabin, uncertain but loyal. The wolf moved gracefully, her paws barely disturbing the snow. Every few yards she stopped and looked back, ensuring they were still coming. The forest grew denser. Sunlight filtered weakly through the branches, casting thin veins of gold on the ground. Darius's fingers brushed the compass again. It was warm now, unnaturally so. The needle quivered, spinning wildly before settling towards the direction of the wolf. He frowned. "Grandma, what are you trying to show me?" he murmured. The trees thickened until they gave way to a clearing Darius had never seen before. There, half buried in snow, stood a wooden arch made of 2 old birch trunks bound together by weathered rope. It looked ancient, almost ceremonial. Darius stopped in awe. The wolf paused before the arch, her breath misting in the air. Then she howled a low, mournful sound that vibrated through Darius's chest. The cubs back at the cabin must have felt it too, because even from this distance, Darius thought he heard faint answering cries carried on the wind. Shadow barked once, the sound echoing like an answer. The wolf's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Darius thought he saw recognition there, like she'd known Shadow in another life, or maybe simply trusted him as one of her own. Then as suddenly as she'd appeared, the wolf turned and vanished into the trees. Darius stood frozen. The clearing was silent again, but it didn't feel empty. The arch behind him groaned in the breeze, and the compass needle began to spin uncontrollably, clattering softly inside his pocket. He pulled it out, staring at it in confusion. "It's not broken," he whispered. "It's reacting." He looked towards the path the wolf had taken, then back at the spinning compass. The metal felt almost alive, pulsing faintly against his fingers. The forest seemed to hold its breath. "We're not supposed to be here," he muttered. But even as he said it, he knew he was wrong. He was supposed to be here. Whatever this was, it had been waiting for him. Shadow whined, nudging his hand, his eyes reflecting both fear and faith. Darius smiled faintly. "You're right, boy. Let's head back before Grandpa sends the whole county after us." On the way home, the compass needle gradually steadied, pointing straight ahead as if guiding them back to safety. But Darius couldn't stop thinking about the way it had spun beneath that arch, or how the wolf's howl had seemed to carry his mother's voice for a fleeting second. When the cabin came into view, Elijah stood waiting on the porch coat, buttoned, worry etched deep in his features. "You're lucky you're still in one piece," he grumbled, relief hiding beneath the anger. Darius handed him the compass. The wind had softened into a hush that morning, the kind that made every footstep sound louder, every heartbeat clearer. The compass in Darius's pocket pulsed faintly against his thigh, no longer spinning but tugging him forward, as if pointing towards something it wanted him to see. Shadow led the way through the snow nose to the ground, his black fur dusted with frost. The trees grew denser, their trunks like sentinels guarding secrets too old to name. The trail they followed wasn't marked, but somehow Darius knew it was the right one. It was instinct, the same wordless pull that had drawn him toward the cubs 2 nights before. Elijah had wanted him to stay inside that morning to chop wood and pretend that the world ended where their porch did. But Darius couldn't shake the feeling that the silver wolf's eyes had been calling to him. Even now, as he walked deeper into the forest, he could feel her presence like a thread tugging gently at his chest. "You think she's out here watching us, boy," he whispered. Shadow gave a low, thoughtful growl, not in fear, but agreement. The path curved around a cluster of pines, and that's when Darius saw it, half buried under snow, tucked between leaning trees like it was hiding from the world. A cabin. Its roof sagged under years of decay, the wood blackened with age, yet the shape was familiar, almost comforting. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney, and its windows were crusted with ice. Darius stopped dead, heart hammering. The compass needle trembled wildly, then froze, pointing straight at the cabin. He took a cautious step forward, crunching through the drifted snow. The door creaked when he pushed it open, the hinges moaning like an old man waking from a long sleep. Dust danced in the pale light that filtered through the window, each particle moving like a memory come undone. Inside smelled of cedar and forgotten winters. Broken furniture leaned against the walls. A coat still hung from a nail, its fabric moth-eaten and stiff. Darius's breath caught as he swept his flashlight across the room. On a crooked shelf sat several glass jars filled with dried herbs and feathers. A cracked mug rested beside a stack of yellowed papers. His beam stopped on a photograph pinned to the wall by a rusted nail. He stepped closer, squinting. A man with kind eyes and dark skin stood beside a woman holding a small child wrapped in a blanket. The woman's face hit him first, her smile, her eyes the shape of her chin. It was his mother, younger but unmistakable. Darius's chest tightened as he reached out and touched the photo. His fingers brushed the brittle paper, trembling. "Mom," he whispered. His voice cracked in the cold air. Shadow barked softly behind him, his tail swishing uncertainly. The boy turned the photo over. On the back, written in fading ink, were the words Thomas and Sarah Reed Winter, 1973. Darius froze. His mother's maiden name had been Reed. Thomas Reed, the man in the photo, had to be his great-grandfather, the same man Elijah had mentioned once, in passing, calling him a dreamer who'd lost his way chasing wolves and spirits. "This can't be," Darius murmured, his voice barely audible. "This place, this was his." He felt a strange rush of warmth fill his chest, as if the air itself recognized him. The floor creaked softly under Shadow's paws as the dog approached a corner of the room. He began scratching at a pile of snow-dusted cloth. Darius crouched beside him and pulled the fabric aside, revealing a wooden chest. Its lock was rusted but weak. A few hard tugs and it snapped open with a brittle pop. Inside were notebooks bound in leather, each filled with looping handwriting. Darius flipped through one eye, scanning the first page. Field Notes, January 1973. Communication with Canis lupus, northern gray wolf. Ongoing observations. He turned more pages, reading fragmented lines. They respond to tone more than word. The forest listens when one speaks with heart, not mouth. Another line stopped him, cold. "The bloodline continues, the gift does not die with me." Darius swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. "What does that mean?" he whispered. Shadow's tail brushed against his leg, grounding him. Beneath the notebooks lay a small wooden toy carved into the shape of a wolf pup. It was smooth from handling, worn in places where fingers had once traced its back. On its underside, carved with delicate precision, were the words, "For my grandson when he's ready to listen." Darius's breath caught in his throat. He knew he whispered, his voice barely holding together. He knew I'd come here. He sank to his knees, the weight of discovery pressing on him like snow on an old roof. The air inside the cabin grew still dense, almost reverent. Outside, the wind picked up again, howling softly through the gaps in the walls, a sound both mournful and welcoming. Darius closed his eyes and let it wash over him. In that moment, he could almost hear his mother's laughter, faint, like an echo carried through time, and the rustle of her favorite scarf as she bent down to hug him. He saw her holding a camera, standing beside Elijah, snowflakes tangled in her hair. She had never told him much about her past, only that their family came from a long line of listeners. He had thought it was just a poetic way of saying they were good people, but now he wondered if it had meant something more literal. When he opened his eyes again, the light had shifted. Shadow stood by the doorway, ears perked. Darius followed his gaze. Across the clearing, something moved, silver and fluid, like moonlight in motion. The wolf. She stood just at the edge of the trees, her fur gleaming in the dim light. For a heartbeat, their eyes met through the open door. Darius's heart pounded. She didn't move forward, didn't run. She simply stood there watching, as if making sure he'd found what he was meant to find. Then she lifted her head and howled a long, low note that vibrated through the air, through the cabin, through him. Darius stepped closer to the doorway, the amulet he had found earlier growing warm against his chest beneath his coat. The compass in his pocket began to tremble again, its needle glowing faintly in the dark. He didn't know what any of it meant yet, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no coincidence. The wolf had brought him here for a reason. Shadow barked once, and the sound echoed back from the woods like an answer. Darius turned back to the room, glancing at the photo one more time. Snow began to fall again as dusk crept over the forest, quiet and endless. Darius lingered in the forgotten cabin, unable to leave the world he had just uncovered. The journals, the photograph, the carved wooden wolf, they were more than relics. They were pieces of a story he had been born into without knowing it. The fire he'd kindled in the old hearth crackled weakly, casting amber shadows on the walls where dust floated like memory. Shadow rested near the door, ears twitching, gaze fixed outward, as if still watching for the silver wolf. Darius sat cross-legged on the floor, reading his great-grandfather's words by lantern light. Each line carried a strange rhythm, written like someone who was both scientist and believer. Language of the wild is not spoken, it is felt. The heartbeat translates what words cannot. He ran his fingers over the ink, tracing the faded letters. "The gift does not die with me," he read aloud, voice trembling. Then who was it meant for? Shadow lifted his head, tilting it slightly as though trying to answer. Darius sighed and leaned back against the wall, exhaustion mixing with wonder. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the soft hum of the forest seep into the silence. That's when he heard it, a faint hollow sound beneath him, like something knocking under the floor. His eyes snapped open. He leaned forward, pressing his ear to the wood. The noise came again, steady and rhythmic, not from wind or pipes, but from something solid. He set the lantern aside and crawled to the corner where the sound was strongest. A section of the floorboard looked newer, different from the rest. Using a rusty fire poker he'd found by the fireplace, he pried it loose. The wood lifted with a soft crack, and a gust of cold air rose from the hollow beneath. There, buried under dirt and ash, lay a small stone object, half the size of his palm, wrapped in brittle cloth. Darius brushed it clean, revealing a flat amulet carved with a spiral pattern at its center and a wolf's head encircling it. The stone was dark gray, but shimmered faintly in the lantern's glow. He turned it over, and faint letters appeared, A. Reed. Anna, he whispered, remembering the journals had mentioned a woman who helped Thomas Reed in his studies, though her name had never been written fully. The moment his thumb brushed the spiral, a faint pulse of warmth spread through his skin. It wasn't like heat from fire, it felt alive. Shadow stood suddenly, ears erect, growling low, but not in warning, more like uncertainty. Darius froze, staring at the amulet as it began to glow softly, threads of silver light spreading through the engraved lines. "What are you?" he whispered, breath-catching. The light faded, but the warmth remained, settling into his chest like a heartbeat. Without fully understanding why, Darius looped the old cord around his neck and slipped the amulet beneath his jacket. The instant the stone touched his skin, the air shifted. The sound of the forest outside grew sharper, the crackle of snow falling from branches, the rustle of unseen wings, the heartbeat of something breathing just beyond the door. Darius pressed a hand against his chest, dizzy. For a moment, he could hear whispering, faint, rhythmic, layered like wind moving through trees. It wasn't English or any language he knew, yet somehow it made sense. Feelings not words, sadness, patience, curiosity, the pulse of the living earth itself. He gasped, stumbling back. No, this isn't real," he muttered. Shadow barked once sharply, as if to ground him. But then another sound followed, the low, distant hum of a wolf's howl rolling through the trees. The sound wasn't frightening. It was beautiful, like the song of something ancient. Darius's breath came fast. He could feel it, not just hear it. The howl vibrated through his chest, matching his own heartbeat. He looked at Shadow, whose eyes glowed gold in the firelight. "You hear it too, don't you?" The dog wagged his tail once, then lowered his head, ears twitching toward the sound outside. The forest felt alive now, like it was breathing with him. Darius picked up the nearest journal and flipped through the pages again, searching for anything about the amulet. One line stopped him cold. "The stone is the bridge between worlds, given only to those who can bear to listen." His hands shook as he reread it. His mother had always said he had a gift for feeling too much. Maybe that was what she'd meant all those years ago when she'd told him he listened with his heart instead of his ears. He thought she was talking about empathy. Maybe it had been something deeper. The fire popped behind him, sending sparks up the chimney. Darius stood and walked to the window. The snowfall had stopped, and moonlight dripped across the clearing like silver paint. The wolf was there again, standing at the edge of the trees. Her fur shimmered faintly under the moonlight, her breath rising in pale clouds. This time, she didn't vanish. She just stood still, watching. Darius pressed a hand to the glass, the amulet burning faintly against his chest. He didn't feel fear, only connection. "Are you showing me what he saw?" he whispered. The wolf tilted her head slightly as though she understood. Then she looked past him toward the cabin itself, lowering her gaze to the ground near the porch. Darius followed her eyes and noticed something half buried under the snow, an old metal emblem shaped like the same spiral etched into his amulet. He turned to Shadow. "We need to go see." The dog barked softly, ready. Darius grabbed his coat, stepped outside, and trudged through the snow. The cold bit into his fingers, but he didn't care. He knelt beside the emblem and brushed it free of ice. It was part of an old wooden post buried deep into the ground, engraved with faint letters, "Reed Research Site 1973. His pulse quickened. This was a research outpost, he said. He lived here, worked here. The wind carried a low hum, again soft but unmistakable. The wolf howled once more and then turned away, disappearing into the forest. Darius stood there a long moment, the amulet warm against his heart. For the first time since finding this place, he didn't feel lost. He felt chosen. He didn't understand it yet, but he could feel the beginning of something, an awakening that had been waiting for generations. When he finally went back inside, Shadow curled beside the hearth head on his paws, eyes still fixed on the door. Darius sat down beside him, pulling the amulet from his shirt and staring at it as the firelight flickered across its surface. He whispered, "If you really can hear me, if you're still out there, Mom, I think I finally found what you wanted me to find." Outside, the forest exhaled, and somewhere in the distance, the silver wolf answered. The following morning dawned gray, and still the kind of quiet that felt heavy with meaning. Darius woke on the cabin floor, the fire reduced to faint embers, the air thick with the smell of smoke and pine. Shadow lay beside him, eyes half open, breathing steady. The amulet rested on Darius's chest, warm against his skin, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. Outside, the world shimmered with frost. Darius pushed himself up slowly, rubbing his eyes, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The voices, the warmth of the wolf that seemed to know him. He slipped the amulet under his shirt and stepped out onto the porch. The snow glittered beneath the pale sun, and for the first time in days, he heard birds. A pair of crows circled above, their cries sharp and deliberate. "You see that boy?" Elijah's gravelly voice came from behind him. The old man stood in the doorway, coffee mug steaming in his hands, eyes squinting at the trees. "They only circle like that when something's stirring." Darius hesitated, unsure if he meant danger or change. "Grandpa," he said, turning, "I found something yesterday, in the old cabin." He pulled the amulet from beneath his coat. The moment Elijah saw it, his expression shifted, first confusion, then recognition, then something almost like fear. He stepped forward slowly. "Where'd you get that?" Darius explained about the loose floorboard, the journals, the photograph of his mother, and the wolf that led him there. Elijah listened in silence, his face a mask of emotions Darius couldn't read. When the boy finished, the old man let out a long, tired sigh. "Lord help us," he whispered. "I thought all that died with your great-granddaddy." Darius frowned. "You knew about this?" Elijah nodded, lowering himself onto the porch step. "I knew bits and pieces. Your great-grandfather Thomas, he was a scientist, sure, but he wasn't just studying animals. He believed there was something bigger, something ancient, that tied all living things together. Folks called him crazy, but he had a friend who didn't. A man named Samuel Blackfeather. The name hung in the air, thick and weighty. He's an elder. Elijah continued from the Ojibwe people. He taught your great-granddaddy how to listen, not just with ears, but with spirit. I only met him once when I was a boy, but I'll never forget his eyes looked at you like he could see through time itself. Darius's fingers tightened around the amulet. Is he still alive? Old as the trees if he is, Elijah said. He used to live beyond Miller's Creek in the pines near the Sacred Circle. That's where your great-granddaddy went missing. Darius felt the weight of that sentence settle in his chest. Missing. The word didn't feel like gone. It felt like waiting. He looked out toward the horizon where the forest stretched endless and inviting. I have to find him, he said quietly. Elijah shook his head. That forest doesn't forgive trespassers, boy. If you're meant to find him, he'll find you first. But Darius had already decided. By noon, he had packed a small bag with water food and one of his great-grandfather's journals. Elijah didn't try to stop him. This time, only placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Take the compass and remember the forest knows when you're lying to yourself." Darius nodded, not understanding, but trusting. Shadow walked beside him as they crossed the frozen creek and entered the denser part of the woods. Hours passed in near silence. The world felt older here, the air colder, the trees thicker, the ground softer underfoot. The amulet's warmth pulsed gently steady as a heartbeat. Occasionally, Darius thought he heard whispers between the branches like the forest was talking just beyond comprehension. When they reached a clearing marked by stone pillars and faded symbols carved into bark, Darius stopped. Shadow's ears pricked his tail stiff. From behind one of the stones came a low, creaking voice. "You shouldn't be here unless you were called." Darius spun around. An old man stood there, tall but bent, wrapped in layers of deerskin and wool. His gray hair braided his eyes, sharp and glowing with the quiet knowledge of someone who had seen too much. "You're Samuel Blackfeather," Darius said, almost in disbelief. The elder nodded slowly. "And you, young one, are wearing something that doesn't belong to the dead anymore." His gaze fell on the amulet, and his expression softened. He murmured, "So the bloodline continues." Darius swallowed hard. "You knew my great-grandfather Thomas Reed." "I did more than know him," Samuel said. "I taught him how to listen." But he wasn't ready for what he heard. "Are you?" Darius hesitated, unsure what to say. "I don't even know what this is," he admitted. "This stone, it speaks sometimes. I hear things, feel things, like the forest is inside me." The elder smiled faintly. "Then you've already begun." He gestured toward a circle of stones nearby. "Sit." Darius obeyed, sitting cross-legged beside the elder. Shadow settled at his feet. Samuel took a pouch from around his neck and sprinkled herbs onto the snow, muttering words in a language Darius didn't know, but somehow understood. The air shifted, thickening with scent sage cedar and something electric, like rain before lightning. "You carry the memory," Samuel said softly. "It passes through the blood of those who still honor the balance between man and wild. Your great-grandfather tried to use it for understanding. Others would use it for power. That's why the forest hid from him when his heart began to falter." Darius felt a pressure in his chest, as if the amulet were resonating with Samuel's voice. "Why me?" he whispered. "Because you listened when the world told you not to?" the elder replied. "You saved what others would have let die. The wolves chose you because you still remember how to care." Darius blinked back sudden tears. Samuel leaned forward and touched 2 fingers to the amulet. Instantly, Darius felt a rush of sensation wind through pine, the heartbeat of a deer, the slow, steady pulse of the earth beneath him. He gasped, vision blurring, as voices filled his head, gentle, wordless, countless. "Don't fight it," Samuel murmured. "Breathe." The forest does not speak in words, it sings in memory. Darius inhaled deeply, feeling warmth spread through every limb. He could see flashes now, his mother, as a child, laughing beside Thomas Reed, his great-grandfather riding beneath this same sky, and the silver wolf standing between them, always watching. When it was over, Darius sat shaking, overwhelmed, but calm. Samuel studied him quietly. "You are what we call a memory keeper," he said. "Your task is not to command the wild, but to remember what it has been trying to teach since before men built fences." Darius met his gaze, his voice steady. "Then I want to learn." Samuel nodded. "You will. But know this: every gift has a cost. When the time comes, you must decide whether to carry it alone or share it with those who have forgotten." The wind rose again, swirling through the clearing. The trees seemed to bow slightly toward them. Darius stood the amulet, glowing faintly. Shadow barked once, as if echoing approval. "Come back at dawn," Samuel said, already turning away. "There is more you must see." Darius looked toward the direction of home, then back at the elder's retreating figure. Something deep inside him shifted, something that felt both heavy and sacred. He placed a hand over the amulet and whispered to the forest, "I'm listening." That night, the wind returned with a mournful edge, whistling through the trees like 1,000 sighs. Darius lay awake on his cot, staring at the cabin's wooden ceiling where firelight flickered like restless spirits. The amulet burned faintly against his chest, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Shadow slept near the door, but his ears twitched, sensing what Darius could not yet name. The old man's words, "every gift has a cost," lingered like smoke. Outside, the forest breathed. Darius could feel it now, not just hear it, the rhythmic swell of life, the constant exchange between root and wind, predator and prey. When he finally closed his eyes, sleep came slowly, heavy, and deep. But he did not dream in the way children do. He stood in a vast clearing under an enormous moon that hung close enough to touch. The air shimmered thick with sound, though no wind stirred. A line of wolves circled the clearing, their eyes glowing like lanterns. The silver wolf stepped forward, her gaze locking with his. She spoke not with words, but with feeling, a flood of memory and emotion that surged through his veins. Behind her stood a man with gray hair and gentle eyes, dressed in worn field clothes, holding a journal in one hand. "You've come farther than I ever could," the man said, voice deep and echoing, blending with the forest's hum. Thomas Reed Darius asked, his voice trembling. "Great-grandfather." The man nodded, his expression grave. "The bond you carry is older than our family, older than the maps drawn by men. It connects heart to heart, voice to wind, spirit to soil, but others will seek to take it. They will hear only power, not purpose." Darius frowned. "Who?" The man's gaze shifted to the edge of the clearing where the light began to dim. From the darkness emerged shapes, machines, towers of metal and smoke that churned the earth, devouring everything green. "They will come for the forest," Thomas said, "for the roots that hold memory. You must stand where I failed." The silver wolf howled and the world trembled. The sound rose until Darius's bones vibrated. He clutched the amulet, which now glowed with fierce white light. "Wait," he called, stepping forward. "How do I stop them?" Thomas's image flickered like fire and wind. "You will not be alone," he said. "The forest listens. The wolves remember. Trust the voice within." Then the clearing dissolved. Darius awoke with a jolt, sweat chilling his skin. The fire had burned low, and the air inside the cabin was dense with stillness. The amulet glowed faintly under his shirt. Shadow stood beside him, tail stiff eyes fixed on the window. Darius followed his gaze and saw a shape in the snow, a single paw print glowing faintly, far too large to be from any normal wolf. He rose and opened the door. The night air was sharp, filled with distant whispers. He couldn't see anyone, but the forest seemed to pulse with unseen movement. "I heard you," he murmured into the darkness. "I'll protect it, I promise." The wind shifted as if answering him, and for a brief moment he heard the faint cry of wolves far off toward Miller's Creek. Morning came gray and brittle. Elijah sat at the table reading a crumpled newspaper. The headline made Darius's stomach twist before he even finished the first line. Miller Timber Company receives clearance to expand logging operations beyond creek boundary. They're going to cut through it, Elijah muttered bitterly. Through Samuel's land. Darius's pulse raced. They can't. That area, it's sacred. It's part of the wolves' territory. Elijah looked up, his expression weary but resigned. You think they care about sacred money doesn't pray, boy. Darius felt heat rise in his chest. There has to be something we can do. You can't fight men with machines, Elijah said. You'd only get crushed. Darius clenched his fists, shaking his head. I'm not talking about fighting. I'm talking about stopping them. The old man gave a humorless chuckle. You sound just like your great-granddaddy before he vanished. Maybe he didn't vanish, Darius shot back. Maybe the forest took him because he tried to save it. Elijah's gaze softened but didn't argue. You better talk to that old man of yours then. Samuel will know what's what. Darius wasted no time. He packed his bag again, though this time he added the journals, determined to understand what Thomas had failed to finish. Shadow followed close as they trekked through the trees, guided by instinct more than direction. The air felt heavier near Miller's Creek, thick with tension. The distant thud of machinery echoed faintly, a cruel heartbeat that didn't belong. When they reached Samuel's clearing, the elder was already waiting by the circle of stones, smoke rising from a small fire beside him. You've seen them, Samuel said, before Darius even spoke. The ones who come with saws and greed. The forest showed you, Darius nodded, his voice tight. They're going to destroy it. Samuel's eyes were calm but sharp. Then you must decide if you're ready to listen to what the forest asks in return. Darius stepped forward. Tell me how to protect it. The elder threw more herbs into the fire. A blue flame rose and the air filled with a hum that made Darius's teeth vibrate. This forest remembers everything that's ever been taken, Samuel said. Every root torn, every creature lost. But it also remembers those who stood to defend it. That's the memory you now carry. Darius's hands trembled. What can I do? Samuel's gaze shifted to the amulet. The wolves will call for you when the time comes. You must answer with truth, not fear. The gift works only through courage. Darius swallowed hard. And if I fail, Samuel's voice lowered, then the forest will fall silent again for 100 years or more. The old man's words hung heavy in the cold air. The fire flared once more, then went still. Darius glanced at Shadow, who was staring into the tree line, where faint silver movement shimmered the mother wolf again, her eyes steady and knowing. The wind carried her howl across the creek, soft but urgent. Darius turned to the elder. She's calling me, Samuel nodded. Then go, Memory Keeper. The time for listening is ending. The time for standing has begun. Darius stepped towards the trees, heart hammering the amulet warm against his skin. As he crossed the creek, he could see through the distant fog the silhouettes of machines bright orange against the snow. The howl came again, echoing through every bone in his body. And for the first time in his life, Darius did not feel small. He felt part of something immense and alive. The rumble of engines shattered the morning calm, turning the forest's heartbeat into a roar of iron and smoke. Darius ran through the snow, his boots sinking deep breath, burning in his throat, the cold air slicing his lungs. Shadow raced ahead, barking his paws, kicking up sprays of powder. From the ridge above Miller's Creek, Darius saw them, 5 orange machines crawling through the trees like beasts of metal. Men in heavy jackets shouted orders over the sound of saws, their voices carried by wind. Trees that had stood for centuries toppled, groaning as they fell. The sound was too loud, too final. Darius's stomach twisted. He felt the amulet's pulse against his chest grow stronger, faster, like a warning drum. The silver wolf's howl rose faintly in the distance, distant but commanding. He looked down at Shadow. Come on, boy. We can't let them do this. They made their way down the slope, the sound of destruction growing sharper. As Darius stepped into the clearing, the men turned surprised to see a boy and a black dog walking straight into their work zone. One man cut the engine of his saw, frowning. The foreman, a tall man with a weathered face and oil-stained gloves, barked, "Hey kid, you can't be here. This area is restricted." Darius stopped a few feet away, chest heaving. "You're cutting on sacred land," he said, voice steady despite the fear rising in him. "You need to stop." The men laughed, exchanging glances. The foreman stepped forward, towering over him. "Sacred, huh? You one of those protest kids from town?" "No," Darius said firmly. "My family's name is Reed. This land belonged to my great-grandfather. You can't take it." The man blinked recognition, flickering across his face. "Reed, you say? Thomas Reed?" "You know him?" Darius asked. "He was a scientist," Briggs said slowly. "Worked with the forestry department before they shut this section down. Been 40 years since anyone claimed ownership here. That means it's ours now." "It's not yours," Darius said, taking a step closer. "It belongs to the forest." The men chuckled again, but the wind carried a sound that silenced them, a long, low howl rolling across the clearing. Every chainsaw sputtered, every engine coughed. The men looked around uneasily. "Coyotes," one muttered, but Briggs shook his head. "That ain't coyotes." The howls came again, closer, this time deeper, vibrating through the snow. The birds fled the trees. Shadow growled softly, his fur bristling. Darius felt the amulet grow warm, pulsing in rhythm with the howls. He took another step forward, raising his voice. "You don't belong here. The forest is alive and it's warning you," Briggs scoffed. "Kid, we got contracts. You can't scare us with ghost stories." He turned toward his men. "Fire those engines back up." The words froze in his throat. From the tree line behind Darius, movement rippled like silver wind. One by one, wolves emerged from the shadows, 6, then 10, then 20, silent, their paws making no sound in the snow. At their center stood the silver wolf, taller than the rest, eyes glowing with the same light that burned in Darius's amulet. The men stumbled back, curses breaking the silence. "Jesus, what the hell?" Briggs muttered, reaching for the flare gun on his belt. "Don't!" Darius shouted. "They won't hurt you unless you hurt them." The wolves stood perfectly still, forming a ring around the machines. Their eyes reflected the dawn like hundreds of tiny fires. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. The forest had gone completely silent, except for the soft hum of wind through the pines. Darius stepped forward, the amulet glowing through his jacket. "This is their home," he said, voice trembling but strong, "and it's mine too. My great-grandfather studied this place to protect it, not destroy it. If you keep cutting, something worse will happen." Briggs swallowed hard, glancing at his crew. "Look, kid," he said slowly, "we're just following orders. You think I like doing this. It's my job." "Then stop," Darius said. "Jobs end. The damage doesn't." Briggs looked around, his hand trembling slightly. The ground gave a sudden low rumble beneath their feet. Everyone froze. The snow near the felled trees began to crack, shifting as if something massive moved underneath. The loggers backed away. "What's happening?" one shouted. Darius felt the amulet burn hot against his skin, and the forest seemed to breathe a single deep exhale that shook loose snow from the branches. Then everything went still again. In the quiet, Darius heard Samuel Blackfeather's words echo through his memory. "The forest remembers every wound." He turned to Briggs. "You feel that? It's remembering what you're doing." Briggs cursed under his breath, looking shaken. "We need to leave," one of the workers said, voice cracking. "This place isn't right." "Stay put," Briggs snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. "We'll lose the contract if we walk." But before he could speak again, the wolves began to move, not forward, not attacking, but circling the machine slowly, their paws stirring the snow in a perfect spiral pattern. Darius's heart pounded as he watched the same spiral carved into his amulet appear in the snow, glowing faintly. The men stumbled back, terrified. "We're done," one shouted. "I ain't staying another second." They fled into the woods, boots crunching the snow in panic. Only Briggs remained face pale and rigid. He looked at Darius with a mixture of awe and fear. You did this." Darius shook his head. "No, they did. I just listened." Briggs's gaze dropped to the spiral forming in the snow. "Tell whoever's running this job that Miller's Creek is off limits," Darius said. "If they come back, the forest won't be this gentle." Briggs stared at him a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "You sound just like your old man's bloodline," he muttered, backing away. "Maybe that's a good thing." When he was gone, Darius turned to the wolves. The silver wolf approached slowly, stopping an arm's length away. Her eyes met his, full of something ancient and grateful. She bowed her head once, then turned, leading her pack back into the trees. Darius stood there, the world still humming with energy. Shadow pressed against his legtail, wagging slowly. The spiral in the snow began to fade, but its pattern lingered in Darius's mind. He looked down at the amulet, which had cooled again, its glow dim but steady. For the first time, he felt both power and peace coursing through him. He understood now his role was not to command the forest, but to remind others of its voice. As the sun climbed over the horizon, casting long gold shadows across the clearing, Darius whispered to the wind, "Thank you." The breeze shifted gentle and warm, brushing his face like a hand. He knew this was only the beginning. Night fell heavy and cruel over Miller's Creek, pressing against the cabin like a clenched fist. Darius couldn't sleep. The memory of the wolves, their eyes glowing like stars, replayed behind his eyelids each time he blinked. The world had gone too still, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Shadow lay beside the door, ears twitching, restless. The amulet pulsed faintly, its warmth uneasy. Darius stared into the dim firelight, feeling something wrong ripple through the air in approaching violence. The smell came first, gasoline sharp and sour, cutting through the scent of pine. Then came the sound of engines, muffled voices, and the crunch of boots in the snow. Shadow growled low in his throat. Darius shot to his feet and ran to the window. In the distance, orange glows moved between the trees' torches. His stomach dropped. "No," he whispered. He grabbed his coat and opened the door, cold air slapping his face. Flames flickered far beyond the ridge. He could see silhouettes now, men moving with purpose, carrying cans and axes. "They're coming back," Darius breathed. "They're going to burn it." Shadow barked once, sharp and urgent, as if confirming it. Darius raced into the night snow, spraying under his boots. The cold bit his skin, but adrenaline burned hotter. The forest pulsed with panic, every tree whispering in fear. He could feel it through the amulet, life trembling under the threat of fire. "We have to stop them," he said to Shadow, though his voice trembled. By the time he reached the clearing, the first flames had caught. A line of fire crawled across the fallen logs, snapping like wild laughter. The heat surged outward, melting the snow into steam. Briggs stood among his men, face hard and illuminated by the orange glow. "No witnesses this time," he shouted. "We finish this, get the payout, and forget this cursed place ever existed." Darius stepped into the firelight, chest heaving, breath steaming. "Stop," he shouted, voice cracking. The men turned. Briggs's expression darkened. "You again." Darius stood tall, though fear twisted inside him. "You don't understand what you're doing. This forest is alive." "It's warning you," Briggs sneered. "Kid, I've had enough of your ghost stories." He raised a torch, tossing it toward a cluster of dry branches. Flames erupted in seconds, devouring the undergrowth. The heat washed over Darius's face. He took a step back, but Shadow growled, standing firm. "If you won't stop," Darius said, voice trembling, "then the forest will." Briggs laughed. "Let's see it try." A deep rolling sound rose beneath their feet, a low growl that came not from any throat, but from the earth itself. The flames bent sideways, whipped by a sudden gust of freezing wind. The men stumbled, shouting. Then came the howl, a single piercing cry that split the night. Out of the darkness, the silver wolf emerged, her fur reflecting the fire's glow, her eyes burning with fierce light. The other wolves followed, circling the clearing, their howls blending into a haunting chorus. The men froze, weapons forgotten. Briggs reached for his flare gun, but before he could fire, the ground cracked beneath him, spilling embers. He fell backward, shouting in terror. The fire spread faster now, hungry and alive. Darius coughed, smoke clawing at his throat. "We have to go," he shouted, grabbing Shadow's collar, but the silver wolf turned toward him instead of fleeing. She walked through the smoke unafraid, her eyes fixed on Darius's. Time slowed. He felt her voice inside his chest, no words, only meaning. "Do not run. Remember who you are." The flames surged higher, devouring branches, wrapping the clearing in an infernal wall. Briggs and his men scrambled to their truck's engines, screaming as they fled into the night. Darius tried to follow, but the fire cut him off. The air burned. He dropped to his knees, gasping, shielding his face. Shadow barked wildly beside him, desperate. The silver wolf stepped between them and the flames. Her body shimmered, glowing brighter, the spiral symbol forming in the air around her. Darius screamed no, but she didn't stop. She turned her gaze toward him, calm and knowing. A beam of white light burst from her chest, striking the amulet. It blazed like a star, heatless but blinding. Darius felt his body lift, his mind flooding with sensations, the heartbeat of the forest, the rush of rivers, the cry of every creature taking shelter. He saw flashes of the past, his great-grandfather riding by lantern light, Samuel chanting under moonlight, his mother standing beside a young wolf smiling. The pain of it all seared through him, but beneath it was peace. The wolf took another step, the fire licking at her fur. Her body dissolved into light, her essence swirling into the air and vanishing into the stone around Darius's neck. The amulet's glow softened its warmth, now steady and familiar, alive. Darius fell forward, coughing tears mixing with soot. The flames dimmed as snow began to fall, thick, fast, unrelenting. Within minutes, the inferno was smothered. The forest exhaled steam, rising like ghosts. Darius knelt in the ash, trembling his breath, hitching as he realized the silver wolf was gone. Only Shadow stood beside him, now tail low, whimpering softly. Darius touched the amulet. It pulsed once, faint but steady. He closed his eyes and heard her voice not in his ears, but in his heart. The fire takes, but it also renews. Guard what remains. He looked around at the scorched clearing. The ground smoked, but life still flickered beneath the ash-green sprouts pushing through. The wolves were gone, but their presence lingered like a hum in the wind. When dawn broke, Darius sat by the creek, exhausted. Elijah found him there, trudging through the snow with fear in his eyes. "Dear God, boy," he said hoarsely, kneeling beside him. "What happened here?" Darius looked at the horizon, where the sun rose over the blackened trees, and whispered. "The forest fought back." Elijah followed his gaze, silent for a long moment. And the wolf Darius touched the amulet gently. "She's still here." He stood slowly, feeling both smaller and larger than before. The forest was quiet again, but beneath the silence, he could feel a steady pulse, the same rhythm as his own heart. Shadow pressed against his leg, looking up at him with trust and sorrow. Darius placed a hand on the dog's head. "We'll keep it safe," he said softly. "For her." The wind stirred then, whispering through the charred branches, and for just a moment, Darius thought he saw her silver and shining, standing at the edge of the smoke watching over them. Then she was gone, but her warmth lingered in the amulet's beat. Darius turned toward home, every step heavy with both grief and purpose. The forest had chosen him, and now it lived within him. He would not let it burn again. The weeks after the fire passed like a dream painted in gray and gold. The snow melted slower than usual that year, and every sunrise over Miller's Creek looked different, softer, as though the sky itself was healing. The burned trees stood like dark skeletons against the horizon, yet beneath them the soil shimmered faintly with new shoots of green that had no right to be there so soon. Darius walked the edge of the clearing every morning, Shadow trotting beside him, his breath steaming in the crisp air. The forest felt alive again, breathing, whispering, watching. The amulet lay warm against his chest, pulsing softly like a second heart, Each time he touched it, he could feel her, the silver wolf, somewhere just beyond the edge of sight, present but unseen. He would pause, close his eyes, and the wind would shift gently around him, carrying her scent of frost and wild grass. "You're still here," he would whisper, and Shadow would lift his head as if he heard her too. Elijah had returned to the cabin, quieter than before, no longer questioning the strange miracles unfolding around them. He had seen the blackened earth bloom overnight, had watched streams run clear after decades of stagnation. "Your mama used to say this land had a spirit," he told Darius one evening by the fire. "I reckon she was right." Darius smiled faintly, but didn't answer. He knew now that spirit wasn't just an idea, it was something living, something he carried. Still, there were nights when he woke drenched in sweat, the sound of fire and wolves echoing through his dreams, the weight of what he'd inherited pressing down on him like a mountain. On the 12th morning after the fire, the compass his grandfather had given him began to spin again. Darius frowned, pulling it from his pocket. "Grandpa," he called. Elijah was outside splitting wood, but turned quickly when he saw the compass trembling in Darius's hand. "That's the same way it spun before your great-granddaddy vanished," he said, uneasy. Darius nodded. "Then I think it's time to go back to Samuel." The elder was waiting in his clearing, sitting cross-legged beside the circle of stones, as though he had been there since time began. Smoke from his small fire curled into the air, carrying the smell of cedar and sage. He looked up as Darius approached his lined face, breaking into a faint knowing smile. "You've brought her with you," he said softly. Darius blinked. "How do you know the air moves differently now?" Samuel said. "She's not gone, only changed. The bond between you and the wolf, it's what the old ones called the returning. You carry her heart, and through it the forest spirit breathes anew." Darius knelt across from him. "The trees are growing again. The animals are coming back. It's like the land healed overnight." Samuel nodded. "That's her gift, and yours. But the healing must be sealed, or it will fade. There is an oath, old as the rivers, that keeps the balance when a guardian is chosen. It is called the Oath of Continuance." Darius felt a chill run through him, though the fire burned hot. "What does it mean?" "It means your life and the forest's life will be one," Samuel said. "As long as you live, it will thrive. But when you die, it will sleep again until another, like you, is found. You will belong here, Darius Turner, forever." Darius hesitated, his breath catching. "Will I still be me?" The elder's eyes softened. "You will be more you than ever before." He tossed another handful of herbs into the fire, and blue smoke swirled upward. "Close your eyes." Darius obeyed. The wind stilled. The air grew thick, humming like a heartbeat. He felt warmth spreading from his chest through his arms, his fingertips tingling. Images flickered behind his eyelids, his mother laughing by the river, his great-grandfather sketching wolves in a worn notebook, the silver wolf walking beside him through endless snow. He felt the forest inside him, roots stretching rivers, flowing the tremor of hooves on soft earth. Samuel's voice rose in a chant, ancient and rhythmic, each word vibrating in Darius's bones. "You are the bridge, the keeper of breath, the voice of memory. Where you walk, life follows. Where you fall, silence sleeps." Darius repeated the words under his breath, not because he understood them, but because they felt right. The amulet grew hot against his skin, glowing bright through his shirt. A gust of wind swirled around them, lifting ash and snow into a spiral. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches bowing toward the fire. Samuel's voice deepened. "Do you swear to guard this land, to remember its song, and to protect its voice until your final breath?" Darius swallowed hard tears burning behind his eyelids. "I swear." The ground beneath him pulsed once, twice, then went still. When he opened his eyes, the fire burned pure white. Samuel nodded, his expression both proud and sad. "It is done." Darius looked down. The amulet was no longer stone gray. It had turned translucent, and inside it, faintly glowing, was the image of a wolf's paw print. He reached up, touching it gently. "I can feel her," he whispered. "Always," Samuel said. "She is your shadow now, and you are hers." The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant cry of wolves, not one, but many. The sound was joyous, like laughter breaking through grief. Darius rose slowly. "They're calling me." "Then go," the elder said. "The forest welcomes its guardian." Darius and Shadow walked through the clearing as snow began to fall again, light and pure. Every flake that touched his skin glowed faintly for a moment before melting. As he stepped into the burned section of the forest, green buds rose behind him, sprouting from ash. It wasn't magic, it was memory. Life remembered how to grow when love guided it. He knelt beside the creek where he had last seen the silver wolf. The water ran clear now, reflecting the sky like polished glass. "I'll keep my promise," he whispered. Shadow pressed against his leg, and in the rippling reflection, Darius thought he saw her face beside his for just a moment, her eyes bright, peaceful. When he looked again, only his own remained, but they carried the same light. As the sun broke through the clouds, Darius knew that whatever bound him to this place was no burden. It was belonging. The fire had taken, but it had also given him something indestructible: purpose. And in that purpose, he finally understood his mother's words. The forest was not something to own or to save. It was family. Seasons turned like pages, and time folded gently over Miller's Creek. What once was scarred black earth had become a cradle of green again, a living hymn sung by wind and water. Trees that had burned now stood taller than before, their bark silvered with age and memory. The forest carried its past in silence, not as sorrow, but as strength. Darius Turner had grown into a man beneath its branches, his hair touched by gray, but his eyes still bright with the same quiet wonder that once led him through snow and fire. The cabin had changed too, rebuilt, with careful hands, its walls adorned with carvings of wolves, trees, and spirals. Shadow, older now, with white whiskers softening his muzzle, lay on the porch most days watching the forest breathe. Visitors sometimes came drawn by rumor. They spoke of the miracle land in northern Minnesota, where trees grew faster than they should, where wounded animals limped into the woods and returned healed. Darius never called it a miracle. He called it balance. He would meet travelers at the edge of the forest, his flannel coat dusted with pine needles, his boots muddy, his smile patient. Children especially loved him. He told them stories not of ghosts or magic, but of listening. The forest talks, he would say, but not with words. You have to be quiet enough to hear it. He would hand them small carvings of wolves he made himself, just as his great-grandfather had once done. When they left, he would watch them fade into the road, whispering a silent blessing for each one. At night, he would sit by the fire, the amulet resting on his chest, faintly glowing. Sometimes he would still hear her, the silver wolf padding through his thoughts like a shadow of light. He spoke to her softly. "They're safe now," he would say. "The forest is whole again, and if the wind happened to shift through the pines, it would sound like her answering him with a soft, distant howl." Years passed like that peaceful, simple fool. Samuel Blackfeather visited from time to time, older now, but still sharp-eyed, his voice carrying the same calm authority. "You've done what few can," he told Darius one summer evening. "You didn't just protect the land, you became part of its breath." Darius smiled. "It's not mine to keep. I'm just holding it until someone else is ready." The elder nodded knowingly. "Then listen closely, because the forest will tell you when that time comes." It did, though, not in words. It came one winter evening 20 years to the day after the fire. The sky was bruised with storm clouds, and snow began to fall in slow, deliberate flakes. Darius sat by the hearth, Shadow's head resting on his knee, the fire crackling low. He was older now, slower, his body tired, but his spirit unbroken. Outside, the trees whispered his name in the hush of falling snow. The amulet on his chest pulsed faintly, the light inside dimming and brightening with each breath. He looked down at Shadow and smiled weakly. "You've done your part too, old friend." The dog thumped his tail, once eyes half closed. Darius leaned back in his chair, letting the warmth of the fire wash over him. His thoughts drifted through the years, the boy he once was, the wolves in the snow, the night the forest burned, the moment the silver wolf gave her life so he could carry hers. The amulet glowed one last time, bright and soft like moonlight. Darius exhaled slow and content, and the forest exhaled with him. The fire burned low. The snow fell heavier, blanketing everything in white silence. When dawn came, Elijah found the cabin quiet, the chair empty, the amulet lying where Darius's heart had been. Its glow faded as the first light of morning touched it, and then it dissolved. No ash, no dust, just a small silver shimmer rising into the air. The same shimmer drifted out through the open door, curling toward the trees. Later that day, when the villagers came to leave offerings, they found something that none could explain. Beside the cabin in the clearing where the forest once burned stood a young silver wolf. Its eyes were the same color as dawn over the creek, calm and knowing. Shadow, old but still alive, lifted his head and wagged his tail weakly. The wolf stepped forward, pressing its nose against the dog's muzzle, then turned toward the woods. It looked back only once long enough for Elijah to whisper, "He's still watching, isn't he?" The wolf tilted its head, as if in answer, then trotted into the forest, vanishing between the trees. That spring, the forest grew wilder, more vibrant than ever before. Flowers that hadn't bloomed in decades covered the hillside. The creek ran clearer, faster, carrying the reflection of the sky. Those who walked the trails sometimes said they felt watched, but never with fear. It was the kind of watching that felt like love. Some swore they heard footsteps following them at twilight, accompanied by the soft pad of paws. Children claimed they saw the man in the flannel coat walking beside a silver wolf, disappearing just before the light faded. Elijah lived long enough to see it all. When he sat on the porch, he would smile at the sunset and say to anyone who'd listen, "The boy kept his promise. The forest remembers." And it did. The spiral pattern once burned into the earth at Miller's Creek became a natural formation of stones, perfectly shaped and untouched by human hands. At its center, wildflowers grew year-round, even through snow. People began calling it the Turner Circle. Scientists came and left, confused. No one could explain the soil's renewal, the water's purity, the regeneration that defied reason. But Samuel Blackfeather knew. On his final visit before his own passing, he placed his hand on one of the trees and whispered, "The keeper endures." Deep in the woods, where the light broke through the canopy in golden threads, the silver wolf watched. Her eyes glowed like the amulet once did, reflecting both Darius's spirit and the strength of the land he vowed to protect. The bond remained unbroken. In the wind's murmur, one could almost hear his voice still steady calm, carrying the same promise he made as a boy. "As long as I breathe, the forest will never fall silent." And though years would come and go, and people would forget his name, the land never did. Every winter, when snow blanketed the ground and moonlight brushed the trees in silver, a lone wolf's howl would rise over Miller's Creek, deep, steady, and filled with love. It was not a cry of mourning, but of remembrance echoing through generations as both warning and blessing. Because the story of Darius Turner, the boy who listened when no one else did, was not about loss or miracles or fire. It was about belonging, about the way a heart could root itself in the earth and teach the world to breathe again. The end. If this story touched something deep inside, you take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps keep stories like Darius's alive. What part of his journey moved you the most? Was it the night the wolf gave her life, or the moment he finally became one with the forest? I'd love to hear what you felt while listening. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Let's see how far the story of the Keeper of Silver Creek can travel.